First of all, good afternoon, Mom Bern Israel. So before we start, let me introduce myself. I am Marian Israel, and my partner is Mr. Yubal Mirados. We are the Reporter 12, and we will be going to discuss about the Chapter 15, which is the results of the Philippine to American War. In 1903, when Mabini was asked whether it was wise to go on with armed resistance to American rule or not, he gave this reply in part: "Let us cease, that the people may rest, that it may work to recover from its recent proprietary losses. Let us conform to the opinion of the majority, although we may recognize that by this method we do not obtain our desires." The Philippine to American War resulted in great loss of lives and decreased economic productivity, which affected the whole population, the rich and the poor. Also, the Filipino desires for independence was crushed for the second time. The Philippine Independent Church, or Spanish Iglesia Filipina Independiente, or also called Aglipayan Church, where many Filipino clergy became administrators of parishes and bishops of the church for the first time, independent from Rome and the friars. Filipino casualties and losses. Historians find it difficult to give the exact figures of Filipino who were killed in the battlefields and the number of casualties from the epidemics and concentration camps. The war resulted in at least 200,000 Filipino civilian deaths, mostly due to famine and disease. Some estimates for total civilian dead reach up to million. As you can see in the picture, he is James Franklin Bell. So James Franklin Bell was an officer in the United States Army who served as Chief of Staff of the United States Army from 1906 to 1910. General Franklin, who took charge of the bloody campaigns in Batangas, admitted in an interview that over 600,000 people in Luzon had been killed and had died of disease as a result of war. If the numbers of those killed in Visayas and Mindanao were to be added, the figure could be raised to 1,000,000. The fact that some 90% of the Carabaos died due to rinderpest, which was also war-related, as recent studies suggest, rice production went down to one-fourth of its normal production. The second is the disposition of the friars' lands. The support to the war, especially by the poor masses, can be measured from the figures of casualties composed mostly of peasants. From the first phase of the revolution, 1896 to 1898 against Spain, to the second phase, 1898 to 1902 against the US, owning a piece of land in addition to independence was a major goal of the struggle. Governor Taft negotiated the Vatican for the forced sale of the estates to the US, with the possibility of reselling the friars' lands to Americans to the US. On 1905, the U.S. completed his purchase of the lands from the Vatican for $6.9 million. In subsequent years, the Filipino elite, along with American businessmen, would be able to buy these estates as a reward for their cooperation and support to the newly established U.S. colonial regime. When the Treaty of Paris was resigned, where the Spain ceded the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million, huge tracts of charged lands amounting 422,000 acres became the property of the U.S. colonial government, but the friars protested and demanded for repossession of their land. So the third is the Philippinization of the church. So as you can see in the picture, it is the Aglipayan Church, or Iglesia Filipina Independiente. So the story of the birth of the Aglipayan Church is to a great extent the story of the struggle of the Filipino clergy to Philippinize the Catholic Church in the Philippines. The struggle, in a sense, revived the secularizations, later the Philippinization movement by Fathers Burgos, Gomez, and Zamora. Apolinario Mabini, in a letter to General Ortiz in 1898, accused the Spanish friars of helping the colonial government. In the second part of the revolution, which began when Aguinaldo returned to the Philippines in 1898, the Governor General and the Archbishop tried to win over the people to the side of Spain. They sent Father Gregorio Aglipay, a Filipino secular priest who sympathized with Spain, to persuade the revolutionary leaders, especially General Artemio Ricarte, Mariano Trias, and Emiliano Rigo de Jus, to side with the Spaniards against the Americans. The Archbishop Bernardino Nozalida in turn urged Aglipay to investigate the condition of the parishes there. So the fourth is the Aglipay becomes military vicar general. So Mabini, who was a Mason, felt happy over the new development at his instance. The revolutionary government late in 1898 recognized the validity of civil marriage. Mabini reasoned that since the revolution had separated the church and the state, it was logical to recognize the civil marriage as valid. In October 20, 1898, Aguinaldo appointed Aglipay military vicar general. As such, Aglipay was the religious leader of the revolutionary government. So the fifth is Nozalida excommunicates Aglipay. So Aglipay's position in the Catholic Church and in the revolutionary government was anomalous. So when we say anomalous, it means the irregular or abnormal. So as a Catholic priest, he owed allegiance to the church, but as a Filipino, he owed allegiance to the revolutionary government. Faced by this dilemma. So when we talk about dilemma, it is a situation in which a choice has to be made between the two alternatives that are both undesirable. So Aglipay chose to be Filipino first, and so, the day after his appointment as military vicar general, he sent a circular to the Filipino priests urging them to unite in the interest of the country. Aglipay also suggested the creation of a council or cabildo which would ask the Pope to appoint Filipinos to all church position. In another circular or manifesto, on October 22, 1898, Aglipay urged the Filipino priests to organize themselves so as to occupy all vacant parishes. Moreover, he urged them to rally to the revolutionary cause, which he said was favorable to the cause of the Filipino clergy. The sixth is the Mabini and the National Church. So being a patriot and a nationalist, Mabini, who no longer held a government position, was vacationing in Rosales, Pangasinan, where he issued a manifesto on October 22, 1899, urging the Filipino priests to establish a national church. It was to be Catholic but under the control and supervision of the Filipino priest. Mabini was against the destruction of the Catholic Church in the Philippines. He was for its preservation, but this preservation, according to Mabini, must be based on the appointment of Filipino priests to all positions. Thus, the national church would still be Catholic, recognizing the Pope at Rome. But the Filipino Catholic Church, it should, in the opinion of Mabini, cooperate with the revolutionary government and not with the Spanish colonial government.
National Church. October 23, 1899, Aglipay called a meeting of Filipino priests at Paniki, Tarlac. Then Aglipay said that the Catholic Church in the Philippines should be Philippinized. But a provisional constitution of the proposed Filipino Church was prepared. One of the canons of the constitution forbade the recognition of foreign bishops by the Filipino clergy except under extreme circumstances. This provisional constitution of the Filipino Church was a declaration of independence of the Filipino clergy from Spanish control and supervision. But the condition of the time, namely the Philippine-American War and its impending effects in the country, destruction and chaos prevented the actual establishment of the Filipino National Church. Opposition to Filipinization. Monsignor Placedo Chapel, an American, arrived in Manila. Instead of sympathizing with the Filipino priests, he announced that those who opposed the Spanish friars were the enemies of religion and public order. He also said that the heads of revolutionary leaders should be chopped off. He even added insult to the injury by saying that the Filipino priests were incompetent and therefore fit to occupy only menial positions in the church. Such brutal frankness, which was quite rare among ecclesiastics, won him the enmity of the Filipino clergy. The separation from Rome. The two Filipino priests in Rome that appeared before the Pope and told His Holiness about the problem of the Filipino clergy are Jose Chanco and Soliciano Araulo. Isabelo de los Reyes, a Filipino writer and scholar in Spain. He founded the first labor union in the Philippines on July 1901, that he called the Union Obrera Democratica, or Democratic Labor Union. He suggested the establishment of a Filipino church independent of Rome with Aglipay as the supreme bishop. The suggestion was loudly proclaimed by those present, and the new church was called Iglesia Filipina Independente. The founding of the church is the separation from Rome. Converts to the new church. Isabelo de los Reyes made a list of what he considered to be sympathizers of the new church. He included Fernando Maguirero, Martin Ocampo, Trinidad H. Pardo de Tavera, Manuel Artigas, Adriano Garces, George Barlin, Manuel Rojas, Trobio Dominguez, and others. De los Reyes was disappointed, for he thought that those men he listed as sympathizers of the new church would join it. The end of 1902, 14 Filipino priests affiliated with the new church. Attempts to win back Aglipay. Aglipay was irritated upon learning that he was proclaimed supreme bishop of the new church. He was at the time conferring with a Spanish Jesuit in the Jesuit house at Santa Ana, Manila. He was invited to a conference at the Jesuit house through Leon Maguerero and Joaquin Luna. Father Fordada S.J., a Spanish author of a book in the Philippines, he persuaded Aglioay to return to the Catholic Church. On the fifth day of conference between Aglipay and Foradada, the latter asked Aglipay to sign a document which was confession of a Catholic Church. Foradada's promised to make him bishop or archbishop if he would sign the document. He seized the priest by the back of the neck and shook him violently. Aglipay left the Jesuit in anger. Consecration of Aglipay as bishop. In October 1, 1902, he presided over the meeting of the council which was summoned to frame a constitution for the new church. In October 26, 1902, he celebrated his first mass as a supreme bishop. And in January 18, 1902, he was consecrated supreme bishop by the Bishop of Cagayan, Pangasinan, Isabela, Abra, Nueva Ecija, Cavite, and Manila. While in 1910, he was now the supreme bishop of the new church, that he invited by the Jesuits to the house of F. Theo Rogers, or the publisher of the Philippine Free Press, and Father Joaquin Villalonga, a kind and energetic missionary, while Reverend Father Santiago Fonashier refused to return the Roman Catholic fold.
Importance of the new church. The Iglesia Filipina Independente, popularly known as the Aglipayan Church, was a child of the Revolution. As such, it was in line with the nationalistic spirit that dominated the Filipino patriots, who fought not only for political but also for religious independence. For more than 300 years, the Spanish priests in the Philippines ignored the Filipino clergy and considered them incapable of holding high position in the church. This discrimination was squashed by the Filipino priests inspired of Gomborza and headed by Aglipay, who showed their capacity to administer parishes and manage the church by founding the Philippine Independent Church. Aglipay and his companions actualized a centuries-old code of vibrant and dynamic Philippines.